Hey guys, tonight we're slipping back to a time of velvet curtains, fainting couches, and very questionable sleep advice. You're in Victorian England, where flickering gaslight stretches the shadows in your bedroom, and the tick of a giant, fussy clock measures the slow minutes toward something like rest. The bed is high, the mattress is lumpy, and your mind won't shut up. Sound familiar? Victorian folks had their own special brand of insomnia, complete with embroidered nightshirts, midnight cheese pies, and a few tinctures that would absolutely get pulled off today's pharmacy shelves. You probably won't survive this. Not because it's dangerous, but because it's just that boring. You'll nod off before you even hit the warm milk. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is there. Night owls, I see you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in a narrow London row house, somewhere between Mayfair elegance and grimy Soho grit. Gas lamps hiss quietly outside the window, bathing the street in a hazy amber glow that never fully goes away. Inside, the air is thick with coal smoke and lavender water. You've been trying to sleep for an hour now, but your body has other plans. You toss, you turn, you contemplate a biscuit. You're officially what they'd call, back then, sleepless. The Victorian era, roughly 1837 to 1901, had a curious relationship with nighttime. It wasn't just a gap between days, it was a secret world. Unlike today, the boundaries between day and night were porous. Gas lighting, introduced in the early 1800s, meant streets and parlors stayed lit well past sundown. The night was no longer a dead zone. It buzzed, it whispered, it lingered. And you're part of a growing class of insomniacs who aren't necessarily worried about not sleeping. Sometimes it feels like the whole city is in on the joke. While the working classes pass out in cramped tenements after grueling factory shifts, the middle and upper classes explore insomnia, almost like a hobby. It's fashionable, even poetic. You rise from bed, not to panic, but because this is normal. People often divided their sleep into two chunks. The first sleep began not long after sundown and lasted a few hours. Then came the watch, a wakeful interlude. It's around midnight now, and your brain feels oddly sharp. You might read, sue, pray, chat with a sibling, or just stare at the fire and think thoughts that are way too deep for this hour. Historians still argue whether segmented sleep was biologically natural or culturally learned. Some point to pre-industrial societies, where people napped twice a night as evidence that we're wired for it. Others think the Victorians were just bored and had too many fireplaces. Either way, this strange routine shaped nighttime behavior for decades. Through the floorboards, you hear a distant carriage clatter past. A dog barks once, then thinks better of it. Somewhere nearby, someone else is probably awake too. Maybe composing a sonnet about melancholy, maybe writing in their diary with exaggerated despair. You're in good company. What's most fascinating is how people talked about sleep, or the lack of it. Newspapers and magazines of the time were full of half-sincere advice on rest, peppered with alarmist theories. Insomnia wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a reflection of your character. The anxious businessman who couldn't sleep, he was probably too virtuous. The overwrought lady of leisure, her mind was too refined to rest. In other words, if you were exhausted, it might mean you were winning at life. Wild. Quirky fact time. Some Victorians believed certain foods could cause dreams, both good and bad. Cheese was a particularly suspicious item. It was blamed for nightmares, erotic dreams, and ghostly visitations. You had cheddar with supper? Good luck with that. Eventually, your eyes begin to droop. Maybe it's the rhythm of the ticking clock, or the way your blanket is finally holding just the right amount of weight. You let yourself sink back into the feather mattress, already anticipating the next round of dreams, or the next round of being awake, because in this era, sleep isn't a single stretch. It's a winding path, with detours, interruptions, and the occasional weird snack break. Welcome to Victorian slumber. Bring a book, and don't forget to win the clock. You wake again with a start, and the silence has shifted. It's not darker. It never got truly dark, but the quiet feels more settled. That's how you know you're between sleeps. This is the watch, the uncanny little midnight intermission that Victorians didn't just tolerate, they expected. The bed creaks as you sit up, adjusting your nightcap with mild annoyance. Welcome back to your nightly layover. Segmented sleep wasn't weird here. It was routine. After your first sleep, which usually kicked off around 9 or 10 p.m., you might stir awake around midnight or 1 a.m. without needing to pee or doom scroll. There was no panic about not sleeping, no blue light guilt or melatonin regret. Just a knowing pause, maybe an hour or two of light activity. It's around 1:15 now, and your legs are already twitchy. You strike a match and light a candle, squinting against the flicker. The flame exaggerates the wallpaper's garish pattern, something floral and vaguely claustrophobic. In the corner, a small armchair beckons. You shuffle over, blanket in tow. You're not alone in this practice. Letters and diaries from the period are full of references to this in-between time. People used it to meditate, journal, read scripture, or whisper secrets to whoever was also inconveniently awake. The book you pick up is a devotional. Victorians loved a moral bedtime read, but you skip that tonight. Instead, you thumb through a cheap reprint of The Mysteries of Udolpho. Gothic novels were a favorite midnight indulgence. You're not ashamed. Even Queen Victoria herself was known to read trashy fiction to lull her back to sleep. Historians still argue whether segmented sleep fell out of fashion because of electric light, changing work schedules, or a cultural shift toward hustle and grind. Either way, you're still stuck in this bizarre tradition. There's a strange serenity to the middle of the night hush. No car horns, no phones buzzing, just the subtle breath of the house around you. Wooden beams settling, maybe a mouse in the pantry. You know the maid will be up in a few hours to stoke the kitchen fire. Right now, this moment belongs to you and other insomniacs across the empire. You think about creeping down to the kitchen for a snack. Midnight supper was a thing, especially among the affluent. We'll get there later, don't worry. For now, you wrap the blanket tighter and listen to your heartbeat, that soft inner metronome. This is sleep, sort of. Not the unconscious, flatline kind of sleep we chase today, but a wandering, interrupted rhythm. You might fall asleep again by 3, or you might not. You're reminded of a fringe idea floating around your time, that sleep wasn't just rest, but a kind of creative gateway. Some spiritualists believed the watch hour opened a door to deeper truths, ghosts, dreams, revelations. You haven't seen a ghost yet, but the coat rack has been making suspicious noises. In more rural corners of the British Isles, peasants and farmers kept segmented sleep well into the late 19th century. There were even folk tales built around the idea that certain dreams only came during second sleep, dreams of premonitions, divine messages, or, unfortunately, awkward encounters with your landlord. Charming. But in the cities, things are shifting. Gaslights stretch bedtime later and later. Society balls wrap up at dawn. Trains and telegrams eat into everyone's peace. Slowly, sleep becomes less of a casual drift and more of a compressed, industrialized expectation. You start to envy the farmhands. You yawn, involuntarily, and it hits you like a stage curtain falling. Your second sleep is approaching. You barely notice it happening. The book slips from your lap. The candle burns low. You slide back into bed, not with intention, but with muscle memory. Your body knows this rhythm, even if your mind resists. One more quirky note before you doze. Some physicians of the time recommended mild exercise during the watch to encourage smoother second sleep. Gentle calisthenics in your nightgown. Delightfully absurd, But if you spot someone shadowboxing in the garden at 2 a.m., you'll know why. You nestle into your pillow, slightly cooler now. The bedclothes, warmed by your earlier tossings and turnings, settle like a heavy exhale. You drift, not suddenly, not all at once, but with the same slow fade as gaslight dimming at dawn. The street outside is quieter now. Even the lamplighters are asleep. Your last thought before sinking is this: maybe sleep isn't supposed to be tidy. Maybe it's just another kind of story we tell ourselves, one watchful hour at a time. The hearth glows faintly as you tiptoe into the drawing room. You've given up on second sleep, at least for now. The clock says it's just past 200 a.m., and this part of the night feels odd. You're not drowsy, not alert, just caught in that half-lit limbo, where time barely moves. Victorian insomnia wasn't always lonely. In fact, sometimes it was practically social. In wealthier households like yours, there's a quiet kind of bustle during these strange hours. You're not the only one awake. Across the hall, you hear someone shuffle in slippers. Your sister's shadow glides past the stairwell. A cousin coughs discreetly into a handkerchief. This isn't a crisis. It's a nightly intermission. Welcome to the Victorian drawing room, Insomnia Edition. By candlelight or low coal fire, this room becomes a haven for the restlessly refined. The chairs are too stiff to nap in, but perfect for dramatic slouching. A fringed lamp glows amber on a side table, cluttered with poetry collections and teacups from earlier. This room was designed not just for show, but for insomnia's softer hours. You settle in, sipping tepid water, and glance toward the chessboard, where last night's match remains unfinished. Victorians didn't always view insomnia as a medical problem. It was sometimes just part of the night's routine. And if you couldn't sleep, you might as well do something civilized. You recall how your great aunt insisted that true ladies never went to bed before midnight, lest they wake with the dull intellect of a milkmaid. Unfair to milkmaids, but you get the sentiment. Insomnia could even carry a whiff of status. You read stories of overworked clerks and exhausted mothers collapsing into bed, while celebrated writers or minor nobility stayed up lamenting their racing thoughts. As if lying awake was somehow a poetic badge of honor. Still, doctors noticed. By the mid-1800s, sleeplessness was showing up in medical texts, not as its own condition, but as a symptom of moral or nervous imbalance. If you couldn't sleep, maybe you were too anxious, or too guilty, or not eating the right puddings. Historians still argue whether Victorian doctors truly believed in insomnia as a standalone disorder, or just a warning sign of deeper dysfunction. Speaking of dysfunction, let's talk about your neighbor across the lane. He's a barrister, often up late reading briefs by lamplight, and you can see the glow from his study even now. Some nights, he paces. Others, he writes long letters to people you suspect don't exist. You've imagined entire narratives about his sleepless routines, though you've never exchanged more than a nod. That's the thing about insomniacs in the night. They're together, but apart. Sharing the same hours, but never the same room. You try a trick from a women's magazine you read last week. Picture a field of sheep, all numbered, hopping over a fence. But yours keep pausing to graze, or glaring at you judgmentally. You give up on that and instead focus on the fire. Its low crackle and flicker feel almost hypnotic. Not quite a lullaby, but close. Here's a quirky little side note. In some circles, it was common to leave the drawing room fire lit all night specifically for insomniacs or the wakeful. A small token of comfort, like a silent apology from the house itself for the lousy night's sleep. The air has cooled slightly. Your toes start to curl against the worn rug. You notice your reflection faintly in the glass cabinet. Tousled hair, bleary eyes, a shawl wrapped like a cape. You look less like a sleep-deprived noble, and more like a ghost in a Dickens novel. Fitting, honestly. You walk over to the window and peer through the lace curtain. Outside, London is quiet. The only motion comes from a lone constable making his rounds, and a stray dog trotting toward nowhere. The gas lamps cast long shadows on the cobblestones, the kind that make you imagine phantom carriages and whispering strangers just out of view. Victorians had a complicated relationship with the night. It wasn't entirely feared, but it wasn't embraced either. It was mysterious, reflective, sometimes melancholy, perfect for the insomniac's gaze. Poets and painters alike found inspiration in these odd hours, something about the blur between sleep and wakefulness, inviting strange, delicate thoughts. Eventually, you hear the upstairs floor creak. Someone's returning to bed. The fire pops softly. You fold the blanket around your shoulders and follow. You're not sure if sleep is coming, but the room is growing colder, and your candle is nearly out. Before you leave, you glance once more at the chair where you sat. The impression of your body lingers in the cushion like an old photograph. This was your wakeful vigil, shared silently with all the other sleepless souls of your era. Maybe that's enough for tonight. You shuffle past the stairwell and down the narrow hall, candle trembling in your hand like a nervous witness. Your breath fogs slightly in the chill. Victorian homes weren't known for efficient insulation. The apothecary's box is just where you left it, nestled on a small side table in your bedroom, like a trusted old friend with dangerous ideas. Sleep remedies in the 1800s ranged from cozy to absolutely unhinged. You open the lacquered lid and survey your options. Here's a small bottle of laudanum, opium in wine, the favorite nightcap of poets and problem cases. Next to it, valerian root, musty and sharp, smelling, a herbal standby since the Middle Ages. You pass over the camphor oil and sniff the sachet of dried lavender instead. Safer. Less likely to make you hallucinate Queen Victoria in your wardrobe. You're not alone in this nighttime ritual. Across the country, from foggy moors to gaslit alleys, insomniacs are rifling through similar boxes. The Victorian apothecary was both a savior and a trap, offering comfort but often loaded with things that today would require prescription pads, stern warnings, and maybe a helmet. You pick the warm milk instead. It's in a jug by the hearth, gently warmed on a trivet, as it has been every night since you admitted to the household you struggle with rest. No one mocks you. Everyone has their secret concoction. Your uncle, for example, swears by eating cold potatoes at 1 a.m. with the solemnity of a priest. Back then, remedies were sold with the same confidence as horoscopes. Just enough truth to soothe you, just enough mystery to sell another bottle. The town apothecary offered sleep draughts. That included everything from hops and chamomile to chloral hydrate. Basically a sedative strong enough to knock out a philosophy professor mid-rant. Historians still debate whether these remedies were genuinely effective or simply placebo theater. It's likely a mix. After all, if you're tucked in bed with a belly full of warm, spiced milk and just the right dose of opium, who's to say whether it was the chemistry or the comfort that finally turned the lights out? A quirky detail. Some of the more superstitious remedies included placing rosemary under your pillow, avoiding blue clothing before bed, or, my favorite, tying a red ribbon around your big toe to drain the heat from your brain. You haven't tried that one yet. You sip the milk slowly. There's nutmeg in it tonight, a touch of cinnamon, maybe a whisper of brandy. The candle beside you sputters a little, dancing in rhythm with your increasingly sluggish blinks. For a moment, you almost feel smug, you conqueror of the sleepless hour, armed with dairy and desperation. But no, the brain's still humming. You stare at the medicine bottle. It would only take a drop, you think, maybe two. But the warnings echo in your head. Laudanum can dull the pain, and also dull your heartbeat. Many Victorians slipped quietly into death this way. Thinking only of a few minutes' peace, you cap the bottle. Instead, you rub a little lavender oil into your temples and lie back, listening to the distant tick of your absurdly oversized mantel clock. It sounds like a metronome designed for someone with very slow thoughts. The thing is, sleep wasn't just elusive in this era. It was layered in meaning. Moralists warned that oversleeping bred laziness, while sleeplessness signaled everything from intellectual restlessness to spiritual unrest. To not sleep well was both a curse and a compliment. Your inability to drift off could mean your soul was busy with loftier things. In London's upper medical circles, sleeplessness was increasingly linked to neurasthenia, a fashionable diagnosis describing a frayed, overstimulated nervous system, caused by trains, telegrams, too much reading, or too little prayer. Women especially were vulnerable, apparently. Their delicate constitutions, combined with corsets, piano lessons, and suppressed opinions, made for spectacular insomniacs. The irony, many of these remedies, and the very idea of sleep hygiene, came wrapped in gender. Gentlemen were prescribed late night walks. Ladies were advised to take warm baths and avoid spicy foods. You, gender aside, are just trying not to chew your blanket from stress. The fire has dimmed again. Your eyelids are heavier, but the second sleep still lingers just out of reach. You blow out the candle, deciding darkness might finally have its say. The room is coated in velvet black, the kind that makes you feel like you're underwater. As your breathing steadies, your thoughts drift to the people who don't even try anymore. The truly sleepless, haunting their homes like polite ghosts. You're not there. Not yet. But you do understand why someone might keep a laudanum bottle on the nightstand, right next to the Bible. Sleep might not come cleanly tonight, but you're well equipped. Lavender, milk, and the strange comfort of knowing that, in the grand theater of Victorian Insomniacs, you're playing your role perfectly. The curtain sways slightly. Stirred by a breeze you can't quite locate, you lie there beneath heavy quilts, staring at the ceiling and waiting for sleep to reclaim you. But your room, it's not just a room. It's an elaborate production set, designed for the art of falling asleep, or at least pretending to. Victorian bedrooms weren't just places to rest. They were full, blown sleep theaters. Your bed is the centerpiece, tall enough that you need a tiny stool to climb in. 4 posts rise like cathedral columns, swathed in thick curtains you draw shut each night to block out drafts and, supposedly, night demons. The mattress is stuffed with horsehair and crackles slightly when you move. There are so many pillows you've forgotten which one is the correct one. Beside you, a side table holds everything from a porcelain water jug to a tiny bell for summoning assistance. If you were truly genteel, a lady's maid or valet might appear in under a minute, ready to fluff your pillows, adjust your shawl, or offer moral support for the midnight malaise. You shift beneath the covers, which weigh almost as much as a small anvil. Victorians believed in layers. Blankets, counterpanes, eiderdowns. The more fabric, the more serious your rest, or your suffocation. Still can't sleep? You reach for the nightcap. Not the drink, but the actual cap. A frilly bonnet designed to keep the head warm and modest. Rumor has it that Queen Victoria herself had dozens, ranging from lacy and delicate to what could best be described as cranial drapery. Historians still argue whether the obsession with sleepwear had a real impact on sleep quality or was just another symptom of Victorian fussiness. Either way, you've got your cotton gown, your nightcap, and your thick socks. You're dressed more like someone ready to survive a blizzard than someone hoping to dream about floating through clouds. You light your bedside candle again. The flame flickers in the mirror, reflecting a version of you that looks ever so slightly haunted. You glance around the room. Every object here has a role in the bedtime ritual. The prayer book for evening reflection, the hairbrush set for calming 100-stroke pre-bed routines, even a tiny embroidered pouch of hops hanging on your bedpost. Part tradition, part folk remedy. Here's a fun little fringe tidbit. Some Victorians believed placing specific herbs in your mattress could influence your dreams. Hops for peace, mugwort for visions, rose petals if you wanted to dream about your future spouse. Your mattress smells mostly like dust and unresolved tension. But sure, Maybe the rose petal thing is in play tonight. Somewhere, a church bell rings 3 times. You stare into the darkness behind the drawn curtains. This room is a cocoon, but one you're very aware you can't quite escape from. Your thoughts rattle like marbles in a drawer, clacking against each other without direction. The room itself isn't silent. There's always noise. The faint creak of wood expanding and contracting, the tick of your personal bedside clock, small but authoritative, a moth suicidally launching itself at the window pane every few minutes. All of it adds up to a soundscape you now associate not with sleep, but with the process of trying to sleep. And still, you're not alone in this. Across England, thousands of similar rooms hold similar rituals. The rich, the middle class, even some of the upwardly aspiring poor. Everyone's playing the bedtime game. But how many of them are actually asleep? How many lie there like you, half seduced by the idea of sleep, half surrendered to its rejection? Let's not forget the nightcaps, the alcoholic kind, a small glass of port, maybe, or a bit of whiskey in a delicate tumbler. You'd be forgiven for indulging. Victorians often believed that warming the stomach would soothe the nerves. It's only 3:15 a.m. After all, you remember a passage from a novel you skimmed during your last watch. The heroine lies awake, unable to sleep, gazing longingly out at the moonlit landscape. She dreams of escape, adventure, forbidden love. You think, mostly, she'd dream of central heating. As you toss the covers back and forth for the 20th time, a familiar idea returns. Maybe this room is too much. Too carefully curated, too densely layered, too filled with the pressure to perform rest. You close your eyes, sigh, and try to pretend, just for a minute, that you're someone else. Maybe a sailor in a hammock, or a stable boy on hay. Anyone with fewer curtains. Eventually, warmth gathers at your core again. You don't remember falling asleep. You just wake a little while later with your candle sputtered out and the faintest hint of dawn threading through the curtain gap. You made it through another night, Victorian style, wrapped in velvet, drugged with milk, surrounded by an empire of bedtime accessories. Sleep, always a ceremony, sometimes a success, often a mystery. Your eyes blink open just as the candle gives one last wheeze and dies. Darkness returns, thick as velvet, but something's different now. There's a slow, growing hum of birdsong outside, thin at first, then rising in layers. It's almost morning. And ironically, that's when you feel most awake. Still not exactly well rested, but alert enough to sit up and reach for the book on your bedside table. Reading, after all, is one of the few things Victorian Insomniacs could agree on. If you can't sleep, you might as well learn something. Or at least pretend to. Tonight, you pick up a well-thumbed volume of serialized fiction. It's the latest installment of The Woman in White, and you've been carefully not reading it during the day, saving it like a midnight dessert. Many Victorians did the same. Bedtime was prime literary time, especially for those without a strict 9 to 5. Serialized stories were wildly popular and perfectly designed for insomniacs. Short, cliffhangered, and just unsettling enough to keep your brain slightly abuzz. As you read, you smile at the ridiculous twists, secret twins, long lost inheritances, someone definitely faking madness. But you also notice how often insomnia appears in the stories themselves. It's not just you. Characters are always wandering around country estates in dressing gowns, unable to sleep, hearing strange sounds in the night. Victorian authors had a knack for dramatizing sleeplessness until it felt glamorous, tragic, and just the tiniest bit haunted. Historians still debate whether this literary obsession was a reflection of real social anxiety or just a convenient plot device. Either way, you find comfort in it. You're part of a long tradition of night readers, your fingertips turning pages by candlelight, your mind wrapped in fictional insomnia while grappling with the real thing. You pause for a moment, listening. The house is still. Even the floors seem to be dozing. A breeze teases the edge of the curtain, bringing with it the faintest whiff of chimney smoke and something sweeter. Maybe baking bread from a neighbor's kitchen. Or maybe it's your imagination. Your brain is, after all, a little loose from lack of REM. Quirky note of the night. Some Victorian sleep guides recommended reading dull literature as a sedative. Treatises on beet farming, railway schedules, obscure political debates. But for many, Gothic novels were the comfort food of the restless soul. They mirrored the strange pacing of broken sleep, slow start, sudden twist, long wandering middle full of eerie silence. You think of Charles Dickens, who reportedly walked the streets of London at night to combat his own insomnia. He found inspiration there. In the flickering gas lamps, the groaning city, the anonymous silhouettes drifting past him like shadows in their own sad stories. Sometimes he'd walk for miles. You imagine crossing paths with him now, your breath frosting the same cold air, both of you haunted in different ways. A floorboard creaks above. Someone else is up early, or still not asleep. You're not sure which. Insomnia in the Victorian age was almost communal, shared through thin walls and flickering lights, and literature became the language of that shared experience. Not just the novels, but the personal writings too. Diaries, letters, essays filled with references to another sleepless night, the burden of waking thoughts, or the cruel ticking of that infernal clock. You think briefly about writing something of your own. There's a journal nearby and a pencil stub tucked in its spine. But your fingers are sluggish now. The urge fades. The story in your lap is enough. The candle has burned so low that the flame is now a mere thumbprint of light. You turn one more page, half hoping to be bored back into sleep. But you're too invested. A character has just revealed they're not who they said they were. Classic. You grin despite yourself. The drama is always slightly absurd, yet perfectly suited for 300 a.m. The fire in the grate has cooled to faint orange embers. Your limbs are heavy again, though your mind still chatters a bit. You mark your page, close the book gently, and set it down. The sound it makes is soft and final, like a sleepy exhale. You lie back, not expecting sleep, but willing to meet it halfway. Your last thought is that Victorian insomnia wasn't just a medical issue or a lifestyle. Sometimes it was an excuse to enter another world, to linger in the inn, between wrapped in wool and fiction and flickering light. You're not alone in the dark. Not really. Somewhere, someone else is reading too, or writing, or watching a candle slowly die, and for a moment that feels like enough. You wake with a jolt, not because you've slept long, but because your ornate bedside clock is chiming, loudly, persistently. 1 chime, 2, all the way up to 6. The sound is impossibly regal, like someone announcing royalty's arrival into your very modest bedroom. You groan. Victorian clocks were many things. Beautiful, expensive, status symbols. But they were not discreet. The mantel clock in your room is brass, framed with Roman numerals and a tiny cherub carved into the base. It ticks like it has a personal grudge against silence. And it's just one of many clocks in the house. There's a grandfather clock on the landing that tolls every quarter hour, a smaller timepiece in the kitchen, even a pocket watch you sometimes keep under your pillow in case you want to torture yourself. Victorians love their clocks. They didn't just keep time, they kept order. As the Industrial Revolution revved up, time became currency. Sleep schedules tightened. Factory whistles and train timetables demanded precision. You, on the other hand, are trying to maintain a sleep routine built around candlelight, good instinct, and mild narcotics. Good luck with that. There's something oddly soothing, though, about counting the chimes in the night. You lie there in the semi-darkness, registering the sound as it bounces through the house. It's a ritual, like checking your pulse or adjusting your blanket. 1, 2, 3, and by 4 you're often asleep again. But not always. Tonight, you're still awake, your eyes tracing shadows on the ceiling that look suspiciously like bats. The candle has burned out, the fire is ash, but the clocks persist. You remember reading about how some Victorians blamed their insomnia on clocks. The tick-tock rhythm was accused of triggering anxiety, heartbeat sensing, even hypnotic states. One doctor even suggested that prolonged exposure to loud ticking could excite the nerves and prevent tranquil slumber. You start to believe him. A fringe tip from the era: some desperate souls muffled their clocks with cloth or removed the hands entirely, convinced that not knowing the time would prevent the obsessive internal countdown that ruined so many nights. Of course, then you'd wake up and have no idea whether it was midnight or Thursday. Historians still argue whether the Victorian obsession with time improved sleep or obliterated it. There's evidence for both. Some folks became human chronometers, sleeping and waking with mechanical precision. Others developed what we'd now call sleep anxiety, lying in bed, panicked that it was 2:43 a.m., and they still hadn't drifted off. You drag yourself out of bed and light another candle. Might as well check the hallway clock. It ticks with a smug certainty, its pendulum swinging like a judgmental finger. You stand there for a moment, letting the rhythm wash over you. Tick. Tock, tick. Tock? It's almost comforting in the way that a lullaby with too many minor chords is comforting. As you wander back to your room, you think about the complicated relationship Victorians had with night. On one hand, they were obsessed with measuring it, slicing it into hours, managing it like a fussy estate. On the other, they romanticized it, wrote poems about moonlight, hosted sell-ins that ran past midnight, and embraced the melancholy glamour of sleeplessness. You settle in again, this time with a blanket around your shoulders, like a shawl of resignation. You eye the clock on the mantel, daring it to chime again. It doesn't, for now. But you know it will soon, and then again, and again, until morning breaks, and the maid clatters through the hall with her pail and broom. Here's something curious. Some Victorian inventors actually tried to design machines that gently woke you with light or scent. Clock, lamps that brightened slowly, or devices that released lavender at dawn. Precursors to your modern sunrise alarms, only with more fire risk. You imagine your clock spewing a puff of floral powder and bursting into flames. Delightful. You close your eyes and try to ignore the tick. Try to hear something else. Maybe the rustle of trees outside, or the faint swish of a dress as someone passes your door. It could be the maid, or another sleepless wanderer. The house is full of them. Eventually, the ticking blends into your breath. Not gone, never gone, but quieter, less aggressive. You think vaguely of all the people before you who lay awake in rooms just like this, listening to clocks, waiting for dreams that wouldn't come. Time doesn't stop. But sometimes, when you're very lucky, it forgets to rush. You're sitting at the edge of your bed now, bare feet on the cold floor, spine curled like a question mark. Sleep has eluded you again, and your body hums with that strange mix of exhaustion and restlessness. It's not just your thoughts keeping you up. It's something deeper, itchier, less explainable. Your legs twitch. Your head feels light. You think, maybe I'm just not built right. That thought wouldn't surprise a Victorian physician. Back in your day, the dominant theory was that insomnia, especially stubborn, recurring insomnia, was a symptom of disturbed bodily humors. You've heard the phrase tossed around by doctors in monocles and well-meaning ants alike. Your black bile must be off, they'd say. Your brain is too hot. Or your spleen is sluggish. You nod, pretending you know what a spleen actually does. The four humors, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, were the medieval leftovers still clinging to 19th century medicine. Everything from depression to gas was blamed on their imbalance and sleeplessness. Clearly a case of excess black bile, melancholy, nerves, whatever they called it. The prescription usually involved changing your diet, bleeding you a little, or, if you were lucky, sending you on a sea voyage. Historians still argue whether Victorian doctors actually believed in these ideas or were just recycling old theories out of professional habit. Some medical schools still taught humoral logic well into the 1800s, while others had already begun shifting toward more modern scientific frameworks. You, of course, are stuck in the overlap. Too late for leeches, too early for brain chemistry. You remember a visit from Dr. Livingston last spring when your insomnia first worsened. He looked you over with the gravity of someone inspecting a cracked teacup. He asked about your dreams, your digestion, your relationship with your mother. Then he declared your nerves vexed and prescribed rest, fresh air, and a powder that made you briefly hallucinate a conversation with your grandmother's portrait. That powder now lives at the back of your apothecary box. You haven't touched it since. You move to the window and press your forehead against the cold glass. Outside, the garden is faintly lit by the moon, rows of cabbages and asters still in their place. You wonder if your restlessness is really about the black bile, or if it's just the fact that you're awake while everyone else sleeps, floating through a world that doesn't quite belong to you. There's a quiet debate inside your head. Do you tell people how little you sleep? Do you admit how your limbs buzz like static? There's a kind of shame in it, isn't there? Even now, even in an era that celebrates sensitive souls and poets who roam moors in the dark, you recall a passage from a health manuals. The properly rested citizen is upright in posture, clear in thought, and strong in will. The insomniac is, alas, none of these things. Charming. You stifle a snort and curl into a chair by the fireplace, drawing your knees to your chest. The fire's long gone, but the ashes still hold a whisper of warmth. You rub your hands together, hoping friction can do what warm milk and black bile theory cannot. A quirky detail comes to mind. One Victorian remedy for excited nerves was to submerge your feet in cold water before bed. Supposedly, it pulled the heat out of your overstimulated brain. You tried it once. All you got was wet socks and mild resentment. You breathe deep and try a different method, reciting memorized poetry. It's one of those things you were trained to do back when you thought being cultured could fix you. You begin, Abu Ben Adam, may his tribe increase, awoke one night from a deep dream of peace. You can't help but laugh. Must be nice, Abo. The wind picks up outside, brushing through the garden with soft rustles. Your heart slows, just slightly. The itch in your legs dulls. You close your eyes. You know you won't sleep well. But maybe, if the humors go quiet, if the clock holds its breath, if the moon agrees, you might doze for a while. A patchwork sleep. A lopsided nap stitched into a night that never quite fit right. And in the morning, when the doctor asks how you slept, you'll nod and say, like a stone. It's easier that way. You're awake again. And this time, your stomach is growling like a feral cat. You glance at the clock. It's 24/7 a.m. and your body has decided that now is the perfect time for a snack. You sigh, grab your shawl, and tiptoe down the creaky stairs toward the kitchen. In Victorian England, you're not alone in this impulse. Midnight suppers weren't a quirk. They were a way of life. You strike a match and light a lamp, casting a puddle of amber glow across the tiled floor. The kitchen smells faintly of coal smoke, yeast, and last night's roast. On the counter, beneath a white cloth, sits a plate of cold meat pies, perfectly respectable for a post-midnight nibble. You grab one, sit down at the table, and dig in like it's the most natural thing in the world. Because it is. In this era, segmented sleep made midnight meals part of the social and domestic rhythm. After the first sleep, and before the second, many families would gather in the kitchen or dining room to eat. Not a full meal, though some certainly went all out, but enough to take the edge off bread, cheese, cold meats, pastries, even ale or warmed wine. Victorian cookbooks included recipes specifically labeled for night suppers. Things like veal and ham pie, blancmange, or a slice of plum cake. Comforting, digestible, and ideally soothing to the nerves. The belief was that food calmed the stomach and the mind, preparing both for the return of sleep Historians still argue whether this was truly beneficial or if Victorians were just hungry because dinner happened so absurdly early, sometimes as early as 5 p.m. You chew slowly, the crust flaking just right, the filling still rich with clove and pepper. It's not gourmet, but it's grounding. In a night full of fluttering thoughts and twitchy limbs, something as tangible as warm food feels like a small anchor. Across the table, you imagine other versions of yourself, one in Manchester, another in a Sussex farmhouse, yet another in a Brighton townhouse, each waking at odd hours, each reaching for a biscuit or leftover pudding. The nation's insomniacs, united by meat and pastry. A quirky tidbit comes to mind. It wasn't uncommon for late night nibbles to be served formally. In wealthier households, footmen might bring a tray to your room, complete with silver cutlery and a tiny cup of cocoa. Some went further, setting up a midnight buffet for guests lingering after an evening of cards or poetry readings. You, tragically, are not that fancy. But this pie is doing just fine. You sip water from a tin cup and glance around the kitchen. The glow of the lamp touches pots hanging from hooks, herbs drying from a ceiling rack, a cat curled into a comma near the hearth. You envy the cat, always asleep, no thoughts, just purring and the occasional malicious glare. Back upstairs, the house is still. You can hear its bones creak with the slow flex of settling beams. Somewhere, someone turns over in bed. You imagine their dreams. A train ride to the coast, a conversation with someone long gone, maybe just an endless walk through fog. You sit in the quiet a while longer, not quite ready to return to your bed. You savor the moment, no social obligations, no doctors, no questions. Just you, your shawl, and a half-eaten meat pie under gaslight. You recall reading a letter once, written by a vicar to his sister, describing the serenity of the midnight kitchen, where silence and stew make the finest company. It stuck with you, not just for the charming sentiment, but because it gave your own routine a kind of borrowed nobility. You finish the pie, wipe your hands on a napkin, and stand slowly. Your limbs protest a little, full of ache and fatigue, but the hunger is gone. You climb the stairs again, every step a minor creak in the symphony of sleepless nights. Back in bed, the sheets are still warm from earlier. You lie down with a bit more weight in your belly and a bit less tension in your chest. You don't expect to fall asleep, not really. But you feel closer, fed, settled, human. The gaslight outside flickers once, then burns steady. You close your eyes. It's just past 4:30 a.m., and you've given up on pretending you might sleep again. The house is quiet, the kind of quiet that feels ancient. So you light a lamp, again, and reach for your leather-bound journal. The cover creaks as you open it, revealing pages filled with your uneven handwriting. Tonight, like so many nights before, you document your restlessness, your midnight meal, your mood. You are now a proper Victorian insomniac, tired, fed, and journaling by candlelight. Keeping a diary isn't just a habit, it's a right. For the sleepless in your era, writing was both confession and rebellion. You weren't alone. Countless men and women filled notebooks during the midnight watch, recording dreams, grievances, observations, and poems that would never see daylight. It was therapeutic, introspective, sometimes deeply dramatic. But above all, it was a way to structure the shapeless hours between sleeps. You dip your pen into the inkwell and begin. Could not sleep again tonight. You write, 4th time this week. Dreamt of fog and lost shoes. Had pie at 2:30. A chronicle both tragic and mundane, somewhere between Byron and grocery list. In one of your favorite published Victorian diaries, a woman recorded 63 consecutive nights of interrupted sleep. Her entries range from poetic despair to casual comments like, slept poorly. Cat sang at windowsill. Milk disagreed with me. You admire her dedication, and her cat's musical range. Historians still argue whether these insomniac journals were taken seriously by physicians or dismissed as emotional overflow. Some doctors studied them, others ignored them, but they remain a rich window into sleepless Victorian minds, often more revealing than any medical chart. You pause to rub your hand. Writing by hand in the lamplight isn't exactly ergonomic, but the process is soothing. You enjoy the scratch of nib on paper, the smell of the ink, the act of capturing thoughts before they scatter. Sometimes you even write fiction. Just a sentence or two. A man vanishes on a foggy night. A governess hears whispers in the attic. A child sleepwalks to a locked gate that swings open on its own. You never finish these stories. You just release them onto the page, like fireflies from a jar. A quirky detail floats to mind. One 19th century insomniac reportedly wrote entire diary entries in mirror script, letters reversed like Da Vinci's notes. When asked why, he said it was more honest that way. You tried it once. It made your eyes hurt and your handwriting even worse. You glance at the mantle clock. Its ticking has softened, or maybe you've finally tuned it out. The silence now feels intentional, as if the world is giving you this hour as a gift. Not everyone gets to be awake at this time. Not like this, with no demands, no expectations, just space to observe and think. You write about the pie, the clock, the H in your knee. You write about the friend who hasn't visited in weeks, the dream where you fell upward into the sky, the moment earlier when your candle flickered in rhythm with your heartbeat. Victorian journals often mixed the mundane with the mystical. Dreams were considered symbolic. Gut feelings were worth noting. You once wrote an entire entry on the strange sensation of déjà vu when you smelled cinnamon toast on a foggy morning. It still haunts you, and not in a serious way, just enough to make you squint suspiciously at all future cinnamon. You pause again, this time to listen. Still no footsteps above or below. The servants aren't up yet, and the neighbors remain entombed in their second sleeps. The house belongs to you. You take a moment to appreciate it, the hush, the flickering shadows, the way your pen's scratch feels like the only sound in the world. Then, with a satisfied sigh, you close the journal. Not because you're done thinking, but because the candle's getting low again, and you don't want to start a fire. Not tonight. You lie back once more, placing the journal on the nightstand, its leather still warm from your hand. Maybe you'll sleep, maybe not. But either way, you've captured the night, trapped it in ink, given it shape, and that, sometimes, is enough. The morning light begins to press faintly at the edge of the curtains, but your room still feels like night. You're not asleep, again. Instead, you're lying motionless, listening to the quiet buzz beneath your thoughts, and wondering, just briefly, if something might be wrong with you, in a more official way. In Victorian England, if sleeplessness became chronic, if it slipped from poetic inconvenience into a gnawing constant, there was one looming solution: the asylum. You swallow at the thought. You've heard the stories. You've read the pamphlets, and you've seen how quickly a diagnosis of nervous exhaustion could slide into something more permanent. Victorian medicine had a flexible view of mental health. Melancholia, hysteria, and nervous disorders were all convenient buckets where persistent insomnia could be tossed. It wasn't always cruel. It sometimes came from genuine concern, but it rarely led anywhere comforting. If your sleep troubles refused to resolve with milk, prayer, or a stern talking to, doctors might recommend what they called the rest cure. The rest cure, made famous by Dr. Silas Ware Mitchell, was both infamous and oddly popular. It involved total bed rest, isolation, silence, and a strict diet, usually milk and meat broth. No books, no conversation, no writing. Just lying still until your mind, presumably, realigned itself with acceptable levels of Victorian calm. Historians still argue whether the rest cure was effective, or merely a slow descent into psychic rot. You shiver at the thought of being sent away, especially when it wasn't uncommon for sleepless women to be institutionalized without much ceremony. A husband, father, or brother could sign a few papers and, just like that, you'd be in a quiet room with barred windows and lavender, scented linens, monitored by people who smiled too much and asked too little. A quirky and unsettling note. One infamous asylum in Surrey had a special wing just for sleepless cases. Patients were observed for days on end by candlelight to track whether they truly could not sleep, or were simply stubborn. It's not clear what was worse, the insomnia or the constant surveillance. You've heard whispered accounts of people never coming back, or coming back changed, quieter, less curious, cured in the same way a bird is cured of flying when its wings are clipped. Still, some Victorians did seek asylum treatment willingly. Not all institutions were Dickensian nightmares. A few were sanatoriums in the countryside, with walks through flower gardens and staff trained to murmur kindly instead of shout. Some patients even reported sleeping better, simply from being removed from the demands of urban life. No clocks, no deadlines, just birdsong, porridge, and monitored solitude. You wonder, briefly, what it would be like to lie in a room where no one expected you to function, where your only task was to stop being so tired, not just physically, but cosmically, to be less awake in that crushing, wearying way. But no, that's not your path. Not tonight. You throw off the covers and pace your room instead, each floorboard squeaking like it wants to chime in. There's something rebellious about refusing to sleep, in staying awake long after everyone has surrendered. It feels like a secret resistance, even if you're the only one who knows about it. Insomnia, after all, isn't just a nuisance. For many Victorians, it was also an identity, a sign that you thought more deeply, felt more strongly, lived more intensely than others. And sometimes, just sometimes, that was enough to keep the asylum at bay. You glance toward the corner of the room, where your coat and shoes wait by the door. You think maybe a walk. Maybe that will help. Or maybe you'll just stand at the window and watch the milkman make his rounds, envying his ability to sleep during daylight without shame. For now, though, you crawl back into bed, not because you think sleep is coming, but because you've run out of places to pace. You lie there and close your eyes. The fear recedes. The quiet settles back in. You're still awake, still home, still free. For now. It's early morning now, really morning. The light coming through the curtains is soft but steady, the kind that means it's safe to get dressed without a candle. But you're still in bed, eyes open, wondering when everything got worse. Not just your sleep, but the very rhythm of night itself. The problem, some say, began with a single flick of a switch. Electric light. Gaslight was already blurring the boundaries between day and night, but electricity. That changed everything. The incandescent bulb, patented by Edison in the 1880s, spread through the cities like wildfire, promising progress, safety, convenience, and as a completely unintentional side effect, insomnia. At first, you remember marveling at it, how one could flood a whole room in brilliant light without matches, wicks, or fuss. Electric lamps hummed instead of hissed. They didn't smell like burnt oil or coat your ceiling in soot. They glowed cool and white and brighter and harsher than gas ever dared. And they made night feel like day. You remember the first home on your street to install them. It glowed like a beacon. People gathered outside just to stare. At first, it seemed like a miracle. But soon, shops started staying open longer. Dinner parties stretched deep into what used to be sacred silence. Children were told to do more reading before bed, and sleep, the gentle slide into shadow, started to feel negotiable. Historians still argue whether electric light directly caused an epidemic of sleeplessness, or whether it merely revealed what was already broken. Either way, it meant there was now no natural darkness to lean into. No cue for the body to slow. You'd be lying in bed, eyelids half dropped, only to be summoned back to brightness by the flick of a switch in the hallway. A quirky invention from this period, the electric sleeping room. Some early adopters, realizing the damage bright light could do, created special blackout rooms with thick velvet curtains, dark painted walls, and warnings against any electric fixtures after sundown. You always thought they sounded more like vampire dens than bedrooms, but now they seem oddly wise. You sit up and pull the curtain back just a little. Outside, the street lamps have gone dark. The sun is doing their job now, low and golden. But your body feels no more rested than it did under the gaslight. If anything, it feels worse. You think about how night used to signal rest, gas lamps sputtered low, fires burned out, the world dimmed gradually. But electricity flattened that curve. Now light could be constant, perpetual, a state of being rather than a cycle. And with it came the pressure to keep going, to keep doing, to stay productive even after the moon had climbed its peak. You remember reading about how factory owners loved electric light. No more early closings, no more productivity lost to dusk. But in homes like yours, the light didn't just extend the day, it confused it. You'd sit in a bright room at 10 p.m., yawning but awake, unsure if it was bedtime or tea time or something in between. And of course, with more light came more expectations. If you can read by electric light, said one advice column, you can also sew by it, learn by it, and host guests with it. The implication, why would you not stay up? You rub your eyes. The electric lamp beside your bed hums softly, even when off. A background buzz, like a fly you can't quite swat. You miss candlelight. Not the inconvenience, not the fire risk, but the gentleness. The way it encouraged sleep, rather than chased it off. You reach for your slippers and shuffle toward the bathroom, passing the wall switch. You hesitate, then flip it. The bulb above flares to life with a snap, bright and unforgiving. You wince. So does your shadow. You wonder, not for the first time, if sleep will ever be the same again. If those slow, dark nights of childhood, when bedtime meant surrender, not negotiation, are gone for good. You suspect they are. You splash water on your face, cold and sharp. Look in the mirror. Your eyes are rimmed with tiredness, your hair chaotic. You don't look unwell, exactly. Just lived in. Worn in the way wallpaper peels at the corners, still standing, but not quite intact. You towel off, switch the light off again, and stand there in the gray morning half-light. You think maybe you're not broken. Maybe the world just got too bright, too fast. And for now, that's enough of a reason to let your body sag back into bed. Just for a few more minutes. You're back in your room by mid-morning, still yawning, still wired. You didn't sleep. The day presses on, but your thoughts are stuck in the same loop. And so, in the spirit of Victorian optimism, or desperation, you've decided to try one of the newer inventions for sleeplessness. Not a potion. Not a prayer. A machine. Welcome to the age of contraptions. As insomnia began to be seen less as a romantic affliction, and more as a solvable problem, Victorian entrepreneurs pounced. You are now the curious owner, or at least borrower of something called a vibrating chair. It sits in the corner like a small torture device, disguised as furniture. Iron frame, leather straps, a lever that controls speed. You sit cautiously and turn it on. It buzzes, not loudly, but with enough power to make your teeth feel slightly loose. The theory, if it can be called that, is that gentle vibration relaxes the nerves, aligning your spine and pacifying your overactive brain. You're not convinced. But you stay seated, letting the low hum shake through your bones. At the very least, it's distracting. Victorians loved their mechanical solutions to everything. If it could be wound, cranked, or buzzed, someone claimed it could cure what ailed you. And insomnia was no exception. There were electric sleep helmets, pneumatic pressure beds, and even an early version of a white noise machine. A tin disc that rotated to simulate waves or wind. It mostly sounded like a horse chewing oats. You tried that one too. Historians still argue whether these machines were genuinely intended to help or were just elaborate placebos. There's a case to be made for both. The sleep chair you're currently enduring does seem to be quieting your thoughts, if only because it's hard to ruminate when your entire skeleton is vibrating. A particularly quirky invention comes to mind: the electrotherapeutic blanket. It was wired with small coils that passed mild electric currents through the user's body while they slept. Advertisements promised improved circulation, calm dreams, and the restoration of moral fortitude. You suspect it mostly caused weird tingling and mild panic. Still, there was hope in these machines, that sleep could be tamed. That it wasn't some untouchable mystery, but rather a puzzle to solve with the right voltage, the right configuration of springs and wires and softly humming motors. You stand from the chair and your knees wobble. Your teeth feel oddly aligned. You're not sure it helped, but at least it didn't make anything worse. You shuffle over to the writing desk and leaf through a small pamphlet. The Electric Home, Modern Comforts for the Sleepless Gentleperson. It includes diagrams of recommended sleep environments, beds positioned away from electric lines, rooms insulated with cork to muffle urban noise, even special sleep clocks that dim the room gradually over 15 minutes using an elaborate system of mirrors and gas valves. You admire the ambition. You glance at your own bed. No mirrors, no valves, just a pile of tangled blankets and a pillow that somehow feels both too flat and too lumpy. You wonder if it would be improved with electricity. Then you remember the time your cousin tried to connect a heating element to his bed frame and nearly lost his eyebrows. You light the gas lamp again. It flares, warm and flickering, more comforting than the harsh hum of electric light. Maybe the solution isn't in machines after all. Maybe what you need is less buzz, more silence. Still, you keep the vibrating chair. You drape a shawl over it to make it less threatening. It has earned its place, not as a miracle, but as an artifact. A symbol of the age's faith in progress, in solutions, in the idea that sleep could be engineered like a bridge or a steamship. You lie back in bed, the echoes of the chair's rhythm still ghosting in your bones. You stretch. You yawn. You still don't sleep. But you smile, because if nothing else, it's nice to know people were trying. You're sitting in the drawing room again, this time in daylight, wrapped in the kind of tired that clings to your bones. You didn't sleep last night. No surprise there. But instead of hiding it, you find yourself oddly proud. In Victorian society, particularly among the upper crust, sleeplessness was often worn like a badge. Welcome to the strange world of high society insomniacs, where the less you sleep, the more refined you must be. Lady Montague once said she hadn't slept a full night in 20 years, and her guests applauded. Lord Wexley famously claimed to survive on 4 hours of rest and 6 of contemplation. These weren't complaints, they were boasts. To sleep little was to imply a mind too active, a life too full, to ever fully shut down. And you, bleary-eyed and slouched, but still standing, you're practically royalty. Victorian socialites often turned sleeplessness into an identity. The salons were filled with chatter about bad nights. One-upmanship wasn't about who slept best. It was about who needed it the least. Men attributed their wakefulness to business, politics, and genius. Women blamed sensitivity, fragile nerves, and the burdens of emotional labor. Everyone, somehow, made insomnia sound glamorous. You pour yourself a cup of lukewarm tea, the kind that barely qualifies as liquid anymore, and nibble at a biscuit. Across the parlor, your cousin recounts another night of vivid dreams and relentless consciousness. You nod solemnly, as if this is the highest kind of suffering, and maybe it is, but it's also theater. High society sleeplessness was often more performance than pathology. Historians still argue whether this affectation was sincere or social armor. Likely both, in a world that equated business with virtue. Not sleeping became a twisted form of productivity. Who had time for rest when there were ideas to entertain and reputations to maintain? A quirky fact, Queen Victoria herself was said to be a light sleeper, prone to pacing her chambers in the early hours. She'd sometimes write letters before dawn or summon her ladies, in waiting for impromptu conversations about morality and mourning. One poor maid reportedly fell asleep during such an audience and was reassigned to laundry duty. Less talking, more starching. You glance at the fireplace, where coals smolder behind a brass grate. The room is cozy, but your mind is anything but. Still, in this setting, it almost feels like an aesthetic choice. You imagine a future where sleeplessness becomes an accessory, like monocles or melancholy novels. Maybe it already is. You step out onto the veranda for some fresh air, letting the morning breeze brush your cheeks. The garden is awake. Birds dart through ivy. Bees investigate the last of the roses. You think, not for the first time, how unfair it is that animals seem to know exactly when and how to rest. Back inside, you listen to the gentle clink of china, the rustle of newspapers. The day moves on, indifferent to your exhaustion. But you've learned how to exist in this liminal space. Not quite present, not entirely absent. Alert in the way of someone who's run out of ways to fall asleep and decided to just keep going. You recall a piece in the Ladies' monthly gazette titled, "The Productive Sleepless Woman." It featured tips on nighttime activities to elevate the mind and soothe the soul, including embroidery, French lessons, and writing thank you notes. You tried all three. Your embroidery looks like a squirrel fell asleep mid-run. Your French is passable if you're asking for jam. But the thank you notes, those are works of art, especially the one you wrote to the moon for keeping you company. You sit down again, tea refreshed, spine straighter. You don't feel well rested, but you feel seen. Among the sleepless elite, you are not broken. You are simply refined. You wonder what it would be like to sleep without thinking, without measuring, without narrating it in your head like a novel no one asked for. But then again, would you even want that? You're not sure anymore. Afternoon slides in with the soft insistence of a cat curling around your legs. You're not quite napping, not quite conscious, just hovering in that limbo where time doesn't so much pass as settle. You're on the fainting couch now, draped in a wool throw, your thoughts as slow and syrupy as the light filtering through the lace curtains. Sleep still hasn't come. Not really. You've had moments, brief dips, partial slides into something dreamlike, but never the full plunge. And now the day is too bright, the house too awake. You've missed your window, and sleep, always fickle, has wandered off in someone else's direction. But that's not unusual. By the late 19th century, the Victorian fascination with sleep, its mysteries, its remedies, its machines, had begun to fade. The science of sleep was evolving, and not necessarily for the better. Enter Freud. Freud and his peers took the poetic, strange, body-centric language of sleeplessness and shoved it through a meat grinder of dreams, symbols, and subconscious desires. Insomnia was no longer a physical imbalance or a societal condition. It was your guilt, your repression, your unresolved conflict with your father. Suddenly, not sleeping wasn't just inconvenient, it was suspect. Historians still argue whether Freud's theories helped or hindered the understanding of insomnia. Some claim he pushed the study of dreams into intellectual legitimacy. Others believe he muddied the waters with overanalysis and a tendency to blame mothers for everything. Either way, the age of gaslight and gowns gave way to one of couches and cigars. Sleep, once a shared ritual and a social construct, became personal, private, pathologized. You stopped talking about your nervous nights and started talking about your complexes. You stopped sipping milk and started interpreting your nightmares. And that's when Victorian sleep science began to die, not with a scream, but with a long, over-explained sigh. You stretch on the couch, limbs aching with the weight of unspent dreams. The room smells faintly of lavender and dust, a combination that feels both comforting and funereal. A book lies open on your lap, forgotten 3 pages in. A clock ticks in the hallway, gentler now, almost sympathetic. The world outside your window continues, oblivious. A cart rattles past. Children shriek somewhere in the distance. A dog barks, then thinks better of it. You lie there and wonder if it's better not to try anymore, not to fight sleep, just to let it come, or not come, as it pleases. You're not alone in that thought. As the Victorian obsession with sleep unraveled, many former insomniacs simply adjusted. They stopped keeping sleep diaries, stopped visiting apothecaries, stopped reading dream dictionaries. They got tired of being tired, and so they leaned into it. That's how you feel now. Not angry, not even anxious, just resigned. Sleep, you realize, isn't a conquest. It's not a performance. It's not something you win by being good. It's a guest. Sometimes welcome, sometimes rude, always unpredictable. You stand slowly, the wool throw sliding off your shoulders. You walk to the window and push the curtain back fully. Light floods the room. For once, you don't shrink from it. You let it hit your face, your eyes, your thoughts. Maybe tonight will be different. Maybe not. Either way, the world will keep spinning. The clocks will keep ticking. And you, sleepless or not, will find your way through it. For then you breathe. You smile faintly. And you whisper to the empty room, not tonight, Morpheus, but maybe soon. Her word count 1 is Evan 1, wind down 300 words. And now, as the light grows soft and shadows stretch long across the floorboards, your breathing slows. The clocks tick on, but more quietly. You've left behind the whirring machines, the herbal tinctures, the velvet, draped bedrooms with their twitchy pillows and clumsy sleep theories. You're in a quiet place now. The bustle of Victorian streets fades to a hum. The gaslights flicker one last time before bowing out. Even the nightcap, wearing silhouettes that haunt the drawing rooms and kitchens of long past England, begin to blur at the edges, dissolving into the dark. Their sleepless footsteps slow, their teacups cool, their restless journals close for good. You are here, in your own time, on your own couch or bed, or wherever you're listening. The ticking has grown soft, now merely a suggestion. The breeze stirs gently against the curtain, and your blanket, yes, that perfect one, is warm in all the right places. It's all right now. You don't need to remember the difference between valerian and laudanum. You don't need to picture electric beds or interpret dream pigeons from serialized fiction. You've done enough. Thought enough. Felt enough. Your breath is steady, your thoughts fewer now. Drowsy. Floaty. So let yourself drift. Or don't. Either way, you're allowed to rest. The world will wait. The fire is low. The house is still. The sky outside your window is just beginning to think about stars. Good night.